we're going to talk about negative and fractional exponents. You should already have this in your notebook, but if you don't, you can copy it down just like I did in mine. The PDF is available on PowerSchool. So before we jump in and start right away with the examples, we are going to actually start with the definitions. So first we are going to define a negative exponent. So a negative exponent means that you are going to take the reciprocal which is just the math way of saying we are going to flip the fraction of whatever is raised to that negative power. So for example, if we have x to the negative power, so any power, we're going to just represent that with an n. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to change that into a fraction, so put it over 1. And then we're just going to flip-flop the 1 and the x, taking the reciprocal, and that turns the exponent positive. Okay, and then the other way around, if we have 1 over x to the negative n power, again, we're going to take that fraction, we're going to flip it around, and that would be x to the positive n power. All right, and then the next thing we need to define is what a fractional exponent is. So for the most part, we say fractional exponent. You could also see a rational exponent. Rational is just another way of saying it's a fraction. Okay, and for this one, we're just going to go ahead and write an example. So if we have x to the a over b power, so a is going to be in our numerator, b is going to be our denominator. So when we write this, it's going to change into radical form or with a root. The denominator is going to tell us our root value. Our base is going to stay the same, which is x, and then we raise it to the a power. Okay, so one more time, a is the numerator, which tells you the exponent, or the power, and then b is our denominator, which is going to be that root value. Okay, and feel free at any point to hit the pause button if you need more time to write this down. We are now going to move on to our examples. So underneath here, these are the examples that are on your sheet. Again, if you don't have these examples written down, you can either pause it here or you can go to my PowerSchool page to find the actual printout of the notebook page. So our first 3 examples on top here, we are going to rewrite with positive exponents. So we're going to change all of these to from having a negative power to having a positive value. So this one here, we're going to start by putting it over 1 to turn it into that fraction, and then we take the reciprocal. So this is going to be the same thing as writing 1 over x cubed. Okay, then for letter B, we have 1 over 4 to the negative second power. So since this is our negative exponent value, we want to move that to the top of the fraction, and it becomes positive. So that would be 4 squared, and that is the same thing as 16. Okay, and then our last one here, I'm going to have to squeeze it in on the side. So when we're looking at problems like this, the first thing you need to determine is what's actually raised to that negative power. So since there are no parentheses on the top or the bottom, we know that x is just raised to the negative second power, and then on the bottom it's just y raised to that negative third power. So the coefficients, the 4 and the 3, are going to stay where they are, and we are going to switch the positions of the x and the y. So we're going to have 4y cubed over 3x squared. All right, in the next section, so we are going to rewrite with no fractional exponents. Another way to say that is we are going to write in a radical form, which just means use a root. Okay, so for letter A, we have x raised to the 1/3 power. So remember that denominator, the bottom number tells us what root we are taking. So we are taking the third root of x. And then since our numerator is a 1, we do not need to write it. You can if you would like, but we're just going to leave it blank for this one. Okay, then for letter B, we start the same way. So we have the denominator is 5. So we take the 5th root of x. And then we have to the 2nd power. Okay, and then last but not least, we have x to the 3/2 power. So our number out front is our denominator is 2. So we're going to take the square root of, and then we have x to the 3rd. So again, you could put the 2 inside the radical here. We do not need it because without it, we just assume it is the square root. Okay, then for this next part, we are going to go backwards. So now we are going to write with a fractional or rational exponent. So our base stays the same. So our base here is x. Okay, x doesn't have a power associated with it, so we know it's a 1. And then the root we are taking is the square root, so we have the 1/2 power. Okay, and then for letter B, I'm going to write my answer underneath here. So again, we have x as our base. It is raised to the 11th power, so we're going to write that in our numerator. And then it is the 7th root, so we have 7 in the denominator. Okay, and then finally the same idea is here, so we have our base is x. Our power that we're raising it to is the 9th power. The root we are taking is the 3rd root, so we have x to the 9 over 3 power, which when we actually divide it out gives us x to the 3rd power. All right, and then finally we have some simplifying, so not using a calculator and trying to reduce these numbers as much as possible. So my recommendation for these is to make sure that they are in radical form, so using that root notation. It's a form that we're more used to seeing, so I would recommend always making sure that we're working in that first. So first step is we are going to rewrite this with no fractions in the exponent. So the denominator is 2, so we know we're going to have the square root. Our base is 36, and then we're going to raise that to the 3rd power. Now the good thing about fractional exponents, or really roots and exponents in general, is we can do them in any order. So instead of having to figure out what 36 cubed is right away, we can actually take the square root of 36 first. So the reason why we choose to do that is because it makes the number smaller and easier to deal with, especially because we have no calculator. So the square root of 36 gives us 6. And then we just have to cube it. So we do 6 times 6, which is 36, times another 6 gives us 216. So that's our simplified or evaluated answer. All right, and then our last problem for this page, we have the 4th root of 16 cubed. So again, I would highly recommend taking the 4th root first. The numbers aren't going to be very big ever, so if you don't know what it is off the top of your head, you can always guess and check. So I would start with 2 and work your way up. So 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times another 2 is 16. So the 4th root of 16 is 2. So we're going to do 2 cubed. And then we have 2 cubed is 2 times 2, which is 4, times another 2 is 8.